ideas look like? And I said for Locke, ideas can be simple or complex. That's why we can have something like an idea of red or an idea of big. It might not even be that you really picture anything, but you've got the idea there. We might say concept today. But simple, that's just something by itself, something like big or red. Complex, Clifford the Big Red Dog. All right, I've taken a bunch of different ideas and put them together into one single idea. That's complex. It's a mixture of things. It's a mixture of red and big and dog and the name Clifford. All those things put together. Okay? Now, we get these ideas that we have from sensation and reflection. Sensation, that's where you're taking something in right now. You're beholding something with your senses. Oh, look at that chair. Okay, but now the idea is in my mind, but the sensation is coming through my senses. It's coming in that way. And then I can remember later, oh, do you remember that chair? Still, even there, the original impression came to me through my senses, but when I'm reflecting on it, I'm reflecting back with my memory. So, you're experiencing it right now, or you're remembering the experience. Either way, the means through which it came to you was through your empirical apparatus, your senses. But those are the two ways that ideas come to us. Everything. We either are seeing it right now, or in any of the other senses, or we're thinking back to a time that we experienced it. And then, and this is where I left off, Locke says there is a distinction between primary and secondary qualities. Now this one's important because, frankly, even today, as in right now, this notion of primary and secondary qualities and the problem that ensues as a result really is the issue in a lot of modern thinking, even over stuff that doesn't seem directly related to this. And let's see if we can see how we can apply that here. So what are primary and secondary qualities? Well, for Locke, primary qualities are qualities that exist in a thing, or in the object. Whereas secondary qualities are qualities that exist in my perception of the object. So, take something, again. Tables, they're right there. What are the primary qualities of the table? Well, it's this wide, it's this tall, it takes up this much space. That's true whether I'm here or not, Locke would say. So that's a primary quality. Okay? The fact that it's brown-ish on the top, black on the bottom. Is that a primary or secondary quality? Is that a quality that exists in the object, or is that a quality that exists because I'm looking at it?
Secondary.
It's secondary. Okay, now you might think, well, no, it's brown whether I'm here or not. Sure, light's bouncing off it at the same frequency. That's indisputable. But the experience of the color brown is something that happens only when eyeballs look at stuff. Secondary qualities. What does the table taste like? That's only happening with me there to taste it. I'm not going to demonstrate that. The fact that it was brown, that's right, I thought. The fact that it's brown, that's only happening because I've got eyes to look at it. Again, the light bouncing off at a particular frequency that creates, once it creates there, that causes the experience of brownness with our rods and cones in the back of our eyeballs. That's happening whether we're here or not, it would seem. But the experience of seeing the color brown only happens because we've got eyes to see it. And minds to interpret it. Just a pair of eyes by itself isn't going to do that. The whole visual apparatus. Okay, so those are qualities out there. Color, how something sounds. Okay, that's something. Remember the question? Has anyone heard this before? If a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make any sound? And that's not really a deep question. Depends on what you mean by sound. Is it producing sound waves? Yeah. If that's your definition of sound, sure. If there's no one there to hear it, then there's no experience of sound. Like, it's sound waves, but there's no reception of the sound. So in that case, it's not. So it depends on what you mean by it. It's not really a difficult question. Yeah, but it's deep. No, it's not. Locke would say that sound would be a secondary quality. He has no knowledge of sound waves as such. But so Primary, that's qualities in the thing. Secondary, qualities that are a part of my experience of the thing or the object. Now, what's the relevance here? So I said this is a big deal today. Well, the reason why this is a big deal today is the question, is this thing real or not? Is it a matter of, is it objectively real, or is it real in a subjective sense? That comes up a lot today. Okay, so talking about something like, let's start with a controversial one. Gender. Is gender something objectively real outside us, or is it part of a subjective experience that I have? People debate this question. Okay, something like the notion of truth itself. Is truth objectively real? Does this really happen? Is this an actual thing? Or is this something that exists subjectively in me or in us? So I'll talk about, something like, has anyone ever heard the expression, this will come up later when we get to the 20th century too, like X is a social construct. Okay? Oh, that means it's not real. No. It means it's not a thing out there that's real. Okay, so like back to something like gender. Okay, again, it's like those platonic forms. You're not going to find, where is it? Where's manhood itself? Okay, where's femininity? You're not going to find it out there. Okay? You can do that. But is it something subjective? It doesn't mean it's not real, but it's not real in the same sense as something solid like that. Okay, so I don't think Locke's trying to introduce that problem, but nevertheless, there it is. Because our next figure is going to say something to correct Locke on this point. And this person is Bishop George This is going to sound this is going to throw you off. Berkeley. George Berkeley. All right, he's Irish. Now, coincidentally, Berkeley University is named after him. Berkeley is named after Berkeley. That's good. Irish with the Irish pronunciation. Berkeley. All right, that's what you get. Berkeley. So, what's he about? Well, he says this. Look at this notion of primary qualities. Okay. Here's the problem. There are no primary qualities. What qualities could there possibly be out there that would exist without you there to see it? So Locke made that distinction between primary and secondary. So secondary would be the stuff like, oh, what does it look like? What does it taste like? What does it sound like? Sure. And the primary qualities would be things like, well, how much space does it take up? Well, listen, Berkeley says, if you're not there to look at it, it doesn't take up any space, because he uses this Latin expression. And he writes in English, but he goes out of his way to give us this Latin expression. Esse est verkehrt. But esse, I mean, that goes back to some of the medievals. What is that? To be is the infinitive. To be is to be perceived. To be is to be perceived. What in the world does that mean? And he's actually pretty readable. This is in your book. I'm trying to streamline some things, so I might reference a paragraph or two, because I want to get on to, I want to make sure we get to the 20th century. But let's see. What would it mean to be is to be perceived? Remember, I just said a moment ago, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make any sound? Okay, cool. For Berkeley, no. But neither is there a tree. Wait, what? If no one's there to see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, or touch it, it does not exist. It only exists. So it's almost like, or we're looking at stuff right now, that's what makes things, if you'll permit me, be. See the chair? It exists. We're all looking at it. Now it doesn't. Unless there's someone out there looking at it going, why did this person throw a chair out of it? Okay, no one's there looking at it. Does the hallway exist right now? No, if we open the doors, it's back. And now go. No, Barclay's serious. And how do you know? Let's work with this a little bit. Prove him wrong. How do we know it exists out there? Well, okay, we can call someone. We can get someone. We can get a video call. Someone in the hallway is out there. But then all we have is an image in here. We don't have proof or evidence that what's out there is happening. So, like, your house right now does not exist. It doesn't. I can call right now. Yeah. And you hear something in this room on a device. Obviously, Barclay has no idea about phones. But everything you're experiencing right now, you only know that something exists because you're experiencing it right now. So there's only secondary qualities. As Locke would call it, he just calls them qualities because he's like, everything is subjective experience. Now, when you get back home, it'll be there because you're perceiving it. Now, let's be like, well, how does the world function this way? This kind of thing. Fortunately, God is perceiving all of the universe right now, but it only exists because God's perceiving it. Okay? So if God somehow got distracted, what? The universe would not exist because God wouldn't be perceiving it. Let's make that chair exist again. Oh, there you go. Good boy. So, only secondary qualities, or just qualities. Because if knowledge comes to us through our senses, how could we know anything about that which we're not sensing? We can't. You can't say for certain. It would be an assumption to say, with no. And to be fair, I think Barclay's actually pretty right about this. How do you know that something exists if you're not there to perceive it? You have no way of knowing. Now we hypothesize, yes, my house is there right now, okay, because it's always there when I go home. We're going to do that from an everyday kind of experience. But that's an assumption we make. We make all kinds of assumptions in science all the time. Laws of gravity work the same way everywhere. Now, have we been everywhere to prove that? No. Human beings have made it as far as the moon. So how can we say, how do we know on the other side of the galaxy things work this way? Because we hypothesize such. Right? That's called the uniformity of nature. It's an assumption that we have. The universe works basically the same everywhere. Okay, there's fundamental laws of physics. They just work everywhere. Now, that's not to say, that means you should therefore doubt the laws of physics. That's not my point. The point is, we hypothesize that things function the same way because of various assumptions that we have. That are every day. But for Barclay, we have no way of knowing that something exists unless we're there to perceive it. Oh, good thing God's perceiving everything. But try and dispute him on the point. How do you know that something exists without perceiving it? Barclay said you can't. Because that's how it works. And thus, everything we perceive is really nothing more than a collection of our own ideas. So even right now, when you're looking at the stuff around you, remember, your eyes are not windows. It's not like you are not your brain in here looking directly outside. Remember, what's going on is an interpretation that your senses are making that it puts together. And so what do we got? Really, everything, we've only got our own ideas, our own perceptions. It's not like an objective window outside. No. The German philosophers in the 19th century are going to take this and run with it. Like I said, good thing God's there to perceive it. Whew. Okay, next figure. David Hume. Now, as I said, the rationalists, we saw them get a little bit more extreme. So we start out with, I'm a thinking thing, all the way to, the universe is made out of thinking nuggets, monads. So we go from, I'm a thinking thing to everything is a thinking thing, ultimately. So we got more extreme over time. Here knowledge comes to us through our senses. We develop ideas. Primary, secondary qualities. Yeah, but there's only secondary qualities. Hume's going to be more extreme. Well, how can you get more extreme than everything is subjective? Watch Hume. So he's like, okay, Locke was onto something. Berkeley was onto something. And these three, at least they're trying. Hume says the following. We are nothing but, all right, we. The problem here is, Descartes' notion of there's a me. I'm a thinking thing. How do you know that? Okay. Can you see yourself? You might think, well, yeah, I can look in a mirror. You have never seen yourself. Think about this. You have never seen yourself, ever. You might have seen your reflection in a mirror. You might have seen a facsimile of yourself, like in a video or in a photograph. But you've only looked out maybe at your own hands, like that at your body. You've never seen yourself. And that's just your body. You're also terrible at knowing your things about you anyway. We're terrible judges of ourselves. But what is the self? So, I'm going to raise everything to the ground and start afresh. What can I know? Well, there's a me. You don't know that. Because what are you? You are nothing but this. He says we are bundles. This is you now. Bundles of perception. You know what you are? You are nothing but a collection of your sensory experiences. That sensation and reflection stuff Locke was talking about, that's it. That's all you are. No, but I have my own ideas. No, you don't. Everything that you know has been copied and pasted from reality around you. So even in terms of the imagination, is what it is. Your imagination is limited. Now, I'm not saying don't dare to dream, okay? But in your own imagination, say you wanted to come up with some kind of monster. It's second grade art class, okay? Come up with your own monster. What's it going to look like? Well, it's going to have the tail, the line. You can only talk about stuff that you already know. And even if you think you invent something new, it's still going to be based on stuff that you've actually experienced. So think about the monsters we have. What is a dragon? Dragons aren't real. Well, unless you want to go full mud. What's a dragon? It's basically a big lizard with wings. Stuff that we experience in reality, and what we do is we kind of copy and paste and mix them together. That's what we're doing with our imagination. Right? It need not just be about fictitious or mythical beasts. All our ideas are things where we've taken something and put it together. Okay? Everything that we experience is a kind of Frankenstein's monster of ideas. We're constantly building things. But all we are the collection of our experiences. If you delete that, if you delete your experiences, what else is left? Is there a me in there? Is there a you in there? Hume says no. We are what we are because of the experiences that we had. And that's, if there is a self, that's all it is a collection of sensory experiences in some sort of contiguous space. Kind of like Buddha's concept of the anatman, there is no self. Okay, the self is kind of an illusion. It's possible that Hume had read some of the Vedas. He spent some time in the library where there's stuff being translated from India, so it's possible that he's influenced by that. I don't know. But for that reason, since we're only our sensory experiences and the bundles thereof, here are some problems that we've got. Hume has two big problems. Well, really, he has a lot of problems, so I'm going to just talk about a few. That if we're just bundles of perception, and really, he's on the extreme position that knowledge only comes to us through our senses. Here's some issues that we need to recognize. Two big realms where we've got problems. Here and here. We've got problems with these. What problems? Well, we already said we're just our sensory experiences. But we keep coming to conclusions here and here. Both. You might think, oh, he's against this, so he must be for this. He has problems with both. And kind of for the same reason. They both go out of the scope of what we can sense, and then start saying things that they shouldn't be saying. So let's start with religion, but then we'll see he has similar criticisms of science. That's really persistent to the 20th century, and even beyond. Okay, problem number one. And here I will go ahead and say, without any kind of further explanation, here Hume is decidedly ethnocentric and racist, period. But, by this I mean this, he says, religion, what is it? Okay, and here in Europe, okay, Christianity, why are we believing stuff that brown people in the desert said 2,000 years ago? Why do we care? Why has that had an effect here? So that's his problem, and that's put it in what he says in a racist manner. But he also says stuff like, okay, like the miracles. Let's just talk about the miracles. And he has a little book called On Miracles. If someone came up to you and said, oh, I saw someone walk on water. What? Someone took, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, fed a bunch of people, and now they've got leftovers. More than what had started. So somewhere in there somehow, we don't talk about it this way, but Jesus had started creating fish that never swam for people to eat. Loaves that had never been baked, just appeared. Okay? Turns water into wine. Or if you're a Baptist, it's that grape juice again. Wine was different back then. If someone told you any of those things happened, like today, I saw this happen, what would be your immediate response? No, you didn't. That did not happen. Okay, good. Why would you come to that conclusion? Because you've never experienced something like that before. Because we're bundles of perception. So you would say, that's ridiculous. And then you would ask someone for demonstration. Okay, that really happened. Let's prove it. You can't. You can't. The nature of the miraculous is that you can't prove. The couple of instances. And why, says Hume, and here he's somewhere between making, I think, a legitimate criticism and bordering again on the racism. Why are we believing the reports of miracles by these brown people in the desert 2,000 years ago? Like, you wouldn't do that with anything else. But why is it appropriate here? Oh, they wrote it down. Great. Why do we accept this as true? Why do we believe the miraculous? Especially they go out of their way, these religious texts. That may not just be Christianity. It could be Judaism. It could be Islam as well, where you have these. It could be the Vedas, where you have these narrative accounts. And you would say, yeah, they're interesting literature for sure. No argument there. Historically important. But why believe it as true? Especially when they're going out of their way to say, this wonderful thing happened. God parted the Red Sea for the Israelites to walk across. Really? Well, maybe we can find some evidence of that. Huh. Looks like we don't. Oh. God flooded the entire world. Mm-hmm. Do we have evidence of that? No. No, we do have evidence of a lot of flood myths from around the world, probably because every early civilization started near a river. There would be the Nile, the Amazon, what have you. Probably every civilization has a flood myth. But that's this problem with religion. Like, why should we accept as true these reports from almost 2 millennia ago? When we know, he said, like, if you read even just history outside of religious texts, Herodotus or Thucydides, you know a lot of stuff's made up. Even when you're not reading myth, like the Romans and Greeks all the time get facts mistaken, or they say something from their own point of view. Why would we take this as true? It doesn't. We would not, if we were in court today with the evidence that you have now, you wouldn't believe any of this stuff. You would accept, nope, doesn't meet the requirements of scrutiny. All right, okay, so lest someone get on board and go, yeah, okay, he's anti-Christian. Now, he didn't, all this stuff that he says here as a critique of religion, all came out after 1776. This stuff was published posthumously because he's like, I'm not going to mess with this. Okay, this would get me in a lot of trouble. So this stuff comes out after God. In his own day, he writes a lot of history books. But he's also critical of science for similar reasons. Because what do we do in science? And science is starting to develop into its own thing. We have like Aristotelian science. Bacon's come along, not the food. Francis Bacon kind of taking Aristotle's scientific method and honing it into what we know today, where you take out the speculative aspect, make a hypothesis, investigate, do that, right? Confirm your results, all that kind of stuff that you learned in elementary school. We've developed more of that. But in science, we also run into a similar problem of going outside the bounds of our experience. Like what? Well, here he has a problem. If here he had a problem with miracles, especially, here he has a problem with the following things. Let's start with this. Cause and effect, and also induction. To name a few. And those are related issues. Let's actually start with induction. What is induction? Induction is a kind of reasoning we do all the time. And we got to cover. Like deduction. Deduction is where you come to a conclusion that is it cannot be false. Like 2 plus x equals 4, x equals 2 here. Right? Well, can it be 3? No. Not if you're agreeing to terms at the outset. Okay? Assuming that we're subscribing to the same system. Okay, that's deduction. Abduction, well, there is a meaning in which we're capturing people. But abduction is a kind of reasoning where we hypothesize backwards. Where we say, if I came into the classroom, no one was in here and the lights were already on, I would assume that someone had turned the lights on. Okay? It's possible that there was a flicker, something else might have happened. But abduction is a kind of reasoning where we do that, like what made this happen. Seduction is not a form of lying. Okay, but it does come from that word ducere in Latin, like a duke, like to lead, in this case lead into, deduction lead down, seduction lead away, means to lead. Induction, lead into. What does it mean? Well, and this is what we use most of the time in science, okay, induction. You take a series of instances and you generalize from those instances. Okay, so this leads us into problems. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. Let's say I'm looking at birds. Okay, birds. Okay, look. Okay, here's a bird, and it can fly. Okay, so I have an instance this bird's flying. Okay, it's a sparrow. Robin flies, blue jay flies, cardinal, and so on. And so I start to come to the conclusion, this set of things, we'll call them birds. Where X is a bird, X can fly. And so I come to the statement, all birds can fly. Oh, look at this. Here's a penguin. Okay. And look, ostrich. So what we do in science is we take these little instances and we generalize from these instances, but there's exceptions. So when we say most birds can fly, is what we have to end up saying. But we do this all the time. Okay, so here it is a matter of categorization. It can also be a matter of physical processes. At what temperature, Fahrenheit or Celsius, does water freeze?
0 degrees.
Yep, Celsius. Or 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Everywhere? What temperature does it boil? 100 Celsius. What is it in Fahrenheit?
212.
Yeah, that sounds right. It feels right. No, that's not good. But yeah, 100 degrees Celsius, and that's why metric system's better for measurement. All the time? Will it do that if you're on Mount Everest? No. Because that temperature boiling and freezing, whether or not it works at that particular temperature, is related also to how much pressure there is in the air. So if you're higher up, you got to make more heat to get it to boil. So and it's a range. It's not that far off. So you could Google exactly how much. But yeah, so water always freezes at this temperature, except when it doesn't. So that's supposed to be a law, right? It should always work that way. And this is how induction works. We take a couple of instances and we generalize from those instances. But there are always some outliers, things that don't fit. So you can never make the statement, all this. Okay, like I was saying earlier when we make these assumptions about reality, gravity always works this way. Well, how do you know? We've only got our perceptions. You've got your experiences of gravity working. You don't know. You don't know. Now, Hume goes out of his way to say, yes, do science. Okay, it's important to come to these conclusions. even this kind of stuff. We should be doing this. But don't think you're talking about truth with a capital T when you do it. Because all you're doing is talking about generalizations of experiences. That's it. Generalizations, you're not getting an absolute truth, which is what scientists still do sometimes too. We know this is the case. And it's not that it's a best guess. Like sometimes I'll hear people say, oh, that's a theory. Theory means something, a well-developed system that explains something in science. That doesn't mean maybe. That's not what that means in science. But Hume still says, yeah, that's cool. We don't know if it's capital T true. Don't think of this as truth. That's philosophy, not science. Pursuit of truth, maybe. Okay, so induction, you can never really know. And how many counterexamples does it take to disprove something? So let's say we're like Ralph Waldo Emerson. We're living next to the lake, like in Walden, and we're looking at ducks. Well, this duck is white. I'm the first person to ever see a duck. This duck is white. This duck is white. This duck is white. This duck is white. And let's just say I encounter 1 billion ducks, and every single one of them is white. And I come to the conclusion, all ducks are white. How many ducks does it take to disprove that all statement? Well, I've seen 1 trillion white ducks. Here's one black one. So the statement, all ducks are white, is false. And so, how can we make statements about, well, here's how gravity works, or here's how water, when we can't be at every point in the universe where this is happening? It would only take one instance where it doesn't work to disprove it. Okay, so, yeah, cool, that sounds like miracles are possible. Stop it. Okay, that's a matter of testimony. You shouldn't believe these things that people said thousands of years ago. Here it's a matter of, you shouldn't believe this now because they have no way of proving it. We're demonstrating, we know that this will always work in every instance ever. In our experience, it always has. But that's all you can say. So, like in his own day, and this is related to the next problem of cause and effect. We think of cause and effect as something obvious that we see. And really, this is efficient causation that Aristotle talked about. So science is really narrowed down to this now. We don't really talk about material cause anymore. Or formal cause. It looks like a tree. We don't really do that. In science, as such. Definitely not the final cause. Maybe in ethics. But not in science. But cause and effect. Hume says, well, okay. This whole cause thing, causation, cause and effect, what made that sound? You're knocking. You don't know that. All you saw was knocking and then heard the sound. There's no way, where's the connection between the two? Now we automatically assume that because one thing happens, and something happened right after it, that they must be responsible for each other. And those of you who study social science have probably heard of post hoc ergo propter hoc, or correlation does not equal causation. That's exactly what Hume's getting at, with all cause and effect. You see one thing, and then you see another thing, you think, oh, that thing caused that thing. This is how ridiculous you sound, says Hume. He says, okay, every morning, when I get up, the rooster crows, and then the sun comes up. So we said, my alarm goes off, and then the sun goes up. You're waking up before the sun goes up. Rooster crows, sun comes up. It would be ridiculous to say the rooster crowing causes the sun to go up. There it is. But that's what we do when we make these extrapolations about cause and effect all the time. That's exactly what we're doing. This thing happened, this thing happened, this thing happened, so this thing must be causing this thing. You're doing the exact same thing. It's just as ridiculous as saying the rooster crowing is making the sun come up. Just because, well, every day happens. Is the sun going to come up tomorrow? And he'll even grant, sure, okay, Copernican mechanics. Yes, the sun's at the center, but from our perspective, it looks like the sun is coming up. Hume would grant that. Is the sun going to come up tomorrow? You don't know. You have no way of knowing. You can only say, based on every day that I've had so far, it always has. But that's all you've got. You have no, and maybe that's good probability, because it's happened so many instances before. There's a likelihood that will happen tomorrow. That's induction again. You've had all these instances. There's always outliers. So you really can't say for certain. You can say with a high degree of probability, but you can't say for certain. And that's what science is like. So stop talking about it as though it were truth. And also, so like some of what these people are doing, the rationalists, making all these claims about, I'm a thinking substance. Show me your thinking substance, please. Show me your mind. We can carve you up and look at your brain, but we can't see your mind. Oh, but there's monads. Oh, really? like it sounds interesting that you're saying, no, if we were to zoom in and we could break everything down, everything is ultimately non-physical. Okay, prove it. You can't. Based on our senses, we can't do that. So all that stuff is speculative. Which is why Hume says at the very end of his treatise, his big book, and Hume's great to read. He says this, as just a point of advice. When we run over libraries, persuaded of these principles, what havoc must we make? Now, what principles? That, like, if we're reading a book where it's doing this stuff, like, you need to be more skeptical. That principle. If we take in our hand any volume, we pick up a book of divinity, so theology, that's an old school word for theology, or school metaphysics, for instance. Let us ask, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? No. Does it contain any experimental reasoning concerning matters of fact and existence? No. So it's not going out of its way to talk about quantity. It's not talking about measurements. It's not talking about stuff from an empirical perspective. No? Then commit it then to the flames. Throw that nonsense in the trash and light it on fire. Because it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. So if it's not talking about stuff that's measurable, throw it out. Now, listen, he had a lot of books, right? So he doesn't mean this literally, okay, to start burning books. But don't trust it. So like this speculative stuff here, and he also went out of his way to say like theology, stuff about, well, God is this. Yeah, show me that. How can you demonstrate things about God or theology? Or metaphysics. He's not just picking on theology. Okay, metaphysics. Well, there's the world of forms out there. Really? Show me that, please. Well, no, but you have to remember. Oh, do I? Okay. Sure. So Hume is and this is called Humean skepticism even, which is closer to modern skepticism than the ancient skeptics. This is, really? Prove it. Right, like you did when you were a kid. That kind of thing. That's Hume here. Which leads us now to our next batch of stuff, which I'll start here, which is German philosophy. And here, our first figure, we're going to spend some time on. So I'm going to start him today. We probably won't finish him today. And what we've seen so far is a transitory period. So I talked about the rationalists and the empiricists. And so we have a problem. We've got this team, and these two things seem at odds with each other, right? And so our next figure is going to do something kind of like what Plato did in terms of systematizing a problem. So remember, with Plato, before him there was Parmenides, who said everything is one. Change is an illusion. And then we had Heraclitus, who said there's nothing but change. Okay? There's not everything changes, everything's in motion. And then Plato said, you're both right. Parmenides, you're right in terms of the world of forms, everything's permanent there. Heraclitus, you're right in terms of here, in the world of appearance, everything is changing down here. But you're both right, it needs to be tweaked a bit. Our next figure is going to look at these two traditions and go, you're right and you're right, but in different ways. So it needs to be synthesized and tweaked a bit. And our first figure is Immanuel Kant. You probably haven't heard of him. I don't see too many people referencing, like outside of the philosophers, talking about him. Probably one of the most influential people ever in terms of definitely in terms of our thinking, whether we recognize it or not, in terms of modern thinking. For good or for ill. There's some good stuff in Kant, and there's some objectively bad stuff in Kant, which is typical of the time. What does he do? Well, originally, he is a student of one of these students of Leibniz, someone named Christian Wolff, who you don't need to know. Team Monad. This Christian Wolff, and he's a student of him, and he goes on to be a Privatdozent, which is like a professor in Königsberg, which today is in Russia, but at the time it was part of the Prussian part of Germany. decidedly German at the time. And so honestly, right now, this time period, 1724, 1804, Kant is the first philosopher who is a philosophy professor. Everybody before this is not doing philosophy as a job. Okay, like Spinoza was a lens grinder. In fact, that's how he died. He breathed in too much dust. Socrates, remember, didn't have a job. He was just going around making people angry. Berkeley was a bishop. Hume was a historian. Leibniz was a court thinker, so he would go around getting hired. Just like at the time, Mozart was a court pianist. He would get hired by different lords to play. And that's how it worked at the time. Leibniz was the same thing as a thinker. He was someone in the court of various German princes. Just like, say, someone like Michelangelo. Michelangelo, the artist, didn't paint the Sistine Chapel because he was inspired to do it. Why? He was hired to do a job. Okay, that was very typical of the time. Right, so everybody was doing a different job. No one was doing philosophy as a job, as a professor, as an academic thing. Kant's the first one that does that. So that's where we see kind of a tone shift. All right, Kant can be very difficult to read for that reason, and a bit obtuse, I think, to someone unfamiliar with him. So what does he do? I told you he's a Leibnizian follower of Christian Wolff, and then somehow he reads David Hume. So this has to be at least 1776. Okay, so somewhere around thereabouts, and is perplexed because he read that passage I just read. All right, if it doesn't talk about sort of quantitative analyses, throw it out. But Leibniz, though, how much does a monad weigh? Can you talk about monads quantitative? No, they're infinite. They're everywhere. So he reads that and goes, I think he might be right. But how can... And so he has this problem of where you believe something and you realize that your beliefs are wrong. Kind of like what Descartes was talking about. And you have that uncomfortable feeling of what Piaget calls disequilibration. And you know this. You know that feeling where you ever felt like you're falling or you're slightly off balance? You're like, oh, that feeling, but with your beliefs. You're like, no, I've got nothing to stand on. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? That feeling. Except he even goes out of his way to say, reading Hume woke me from my dogmatic slumber, right? Because I just believed what I believed, and then it was like I was rudely awakened. So what? This stuff as is wrong. Okay, the way that I'm a thinking substance. How could I be? How would I have any knowledge of that? Because if I am a thinking substance, I would have to have knowledge of that through my senses. But I can't sense myself as I can sense my own body for sure, but I can't sense myself. But I still think I am. Well, on the other hand, if I'm my senses, those seem to be coming together in a single experience. I'm sensing all this stuff at once without any lag. Okay? How does that work? How am I having this in a centralized conscious experience? If empiricism is true. Okay. Also, there's stuff that we know that I have no idea how we know it. And if empiricism is true, there should be no way that we could know this stuff, but we do. And this stuff this is called synthetic a priori propositions. This is what I mean by Trump being obtuse. Oh, synthetic what? A priori. So in order to make sure this is clear, I need to define some terms. So two distinctions I'll make. A priori and a posteriori. Because even though we're writing in German at this point, I love some Latin terms. And then analytic and synthetic. So let's talk about a priori and a posteriori and analytic and synthetic. And a priori, literally, it means from or out of the before. And you can see that word prior hiding in there. It means out of the before. A posteriori, posterior, out of the after. All this means is this. Something's a priori if kind of you know it beforehand. So if you have knowledge of something, you know it beforehand. Like something like, if you're 20 years old, or however old you are, let's say if you're 20 years old, I know at some point you were 10 years old. Now, do I need to go back and check the records to make sure, like, how do I know you were ever really? No, because part of, 20 is greater than 10. So if you know that, you don't have to go do research on it. Okay, it's true before, it's not, like, I don't need to do anything else. This is obviously true. Whereas a posteriori, you can only know something after you did some research on it. Okay? There's a red car in the parking lot. See, I don't know that with the same kind of immediacy. I'd have to go check. And I could. So that's the difference between a priori and a posteriori. Right. For example, Anselm's argument for the existence of God is an a priori argument. And you know it. You already do. You don't have to do any extra research. You know he exist. Whereas Thomas's arguments are a posteriori. Now look around. From the fact, then you can reach this conclusion. And that's one distinction. The other distinction is between analytic and synthetic. So a statement is analytic if it's true by definition. It sounds like it's a priori. Yeah, kind of, but it's a little bit different. So something is true by definition. What's something is true by? Triangle has 3 sides. So really, when I say a triangle has 3 sides, I'm saying a triangle is a triangle, like definitions. Or the one they like to say back then a lot are, a bachelor is an unmarried male. Really? Do we need to go check? Now, there might be examples. What if you have a bachelor's degree? Not that. But a bachelor is an unmarried man. You don't have to go out and check. A widow is someone whose spouse has died. Are you sure? Should we go check in on it first to see if that's really true? You don't have to. It's true by definition. Whereas a synthetic proposition is something that's not true by definition. This triangle is blue. That's not obviously true. Okay. I mean, maybe it is, but it's not true by definition. Okay. Why go through all these distinctions? Because Kant says we have knowledge of synthetic a priori propositions. Now, traditionally it's thought that if something, that these two things are, like this is connected to this is connected. If something's a priori, it's analytic. If something's a posteriori, it's synthetic. And that's why even those two things seem to match. We, human beings, have knowledge of synthetic a priori propositions. And Kant says, how is that possible? And so let me give you an example of something where, what would that mean? You know something before experience, but it's not true by definition. Picture in your mind, here, we're going to use your imaginative faculty. Picture in your mind a cube. A 6-planed figure. Okay? Picture a cube. You can make it as big as you want. You can zoom in on it, spin it around. Okay, everybody got it? All right. How many edges does it have? Where 2 planes are coming together. Yes. By the way, I love asking that question because it's adorable watching everybody go. Right, you're trying to count. All right, now here's the deal. That took you a minute, and I think it took all of us a minute, right? I know the answer to the question. I had to go and double check. But here's why that's interesting, and why that's remarkable even for Kant, and why it's also an example of synthetic a priori proposition. There was no way you had to do the math. You had to do the math there, right, to figure out how many edges that it had. But somehow your mind built the image on automatic. Okay, like you didn't have to go make a thing with 12 edges. Your mind did it on automatic. It even made it with 12 edges without you being consciously aware of it, okay, in the imagination. So it built it together, fully ready to go, and you had a complete understanding of it, and you know what it is, without you having all the knowledge about it immediately accessible. So it's something you had it prior to experience, but it wasn't true by definition. Which is why you didn't know how many edges does it have? You didn't know that automatically. So your mind built it on automatic. How? That's Kant's question. How could that be possible that our stupid brains could do that? That our minds, how? Okay? Because if what they're saying is true, that doesn't make any sense. And if what they're saying is true, that doesn't make any sense. Really doesn't make any sense on this route. Because that's not empirical. My mind just did that. How could it be? So he goes out of his way in his books to say, especially in his Kritik der reinen Vernunft, the Critique of Pure Reason, which is the big book. The Critique of Pure Reason, reinen Vernunft. Really, his whole thesis in there. How are synthetic a priori judgments possible? How is it possible that we could know stuff like this? What must our consciousness be doing in order for this to happen? And that's his whole problem. So, what does that mean? That's his whole project. So he says this. Here's how it works. So after figuring out like how is this possible, he explores some options. He says what our mind does is a process in order for this to be possible. And this process has a few names, all of which are prefaced by the word transcendental. Transcendental idealism, transcendental dialectic. We'll go with idealism. Transcendental idealism. Not transcendental in the sense of like being trippy, but transcendental being above and beyond. There has to be some stuff going above and beyond our normal everyday experience that explains the phenomenon of how our minds are able to do this. And really, our mind goes through our mind processes reality in 3 stages. First of all, so this is kind of what how our mind interprets reality. So really, it's a mind and senses working together. So first of all, there is the transcendental aesthetic. That's basically filter number 1 that our mind does. There's the transcendental analytic. And there is the transcendental unity of the apperception. Or the apperceptive unity. Okay. What? So here's the concept. The reason why we can do stuff like this is because our mind basically works in a 3-step process of interpretation of the world. So here's how our minds work. Because I was talking about earlier about like our eyeballs are not windows. Like the signals come in, they go down our nerves and into the brain, but then we have a conscious experience. Well, yeah, but what our mind does is it renders the data in a particular kind of way. It renders the experience. Just like, if you've ever watched, say, something on a screen today. Okay, let's say, just for the sake of making this easy, let's say like you've ever watched like a Blu-ray or a DVD. Now, when you see stuff on the screen, the stuff on the screen isn't really happening in your living room, right? Even if you ever see people make mistakes in VR, like, well, this is amazing, they walk into a wall. This stuff's not real, even if it feels really real, right? But what's going on there, and I'm going to use like, even though most of it's stream stuff, let's use a Blu-ray, it's probably an easier example to understand here what's going on. Somehow, like if you look at like the disc, like are the pictures in the disc? The little tiny pictures of the movie? No. There's data on there, and you put that in some kind of reader, alright, laser does its work, and that data is then rendered onto a screen. Okay, whether it be something projected in-house, however it's being projected, it's being rendered, the data is being interpreted and then rendered into an experience that then you can enjoy. Okay? And here too, I play a lot of video games, and here you can sometimes you can see the rendering happen when like say you're driving around in GTA. All right, you've gone too fast into a new area and the frame rate drops. It's like 20 FPS. Okay, and then like the buildings aren't completely there yet. Okay, so all right, some of you have this experience, or any online play with this lag. It's rendering, but it's not working quite right. But it's rendering. Okay, trying to put it together based on the data that's there. Our minds work in a similar way. Okay, the data is out there and it's coming in right now, live feed. But what's out there and what I'm experiencing are not the same thing. What we're experiencing right now, what your consciousness right now, is rendering the reality around you. We have a tendency to think that what's out here around us, well, this is how the world looks. To us, for example, our eyeballs, we can only see on the visible spectrum of light. There's light that's too slow for us to see. That's infrared. There's light that's too fast for us to see. That's ultraviolet. There are other beings that can experience, like reptiles, can see in infrared. We cannot. Which allows them to see heat. Okay, we can't do that. So our visible spectrum of light, we're only getting a picture of what's a little sliver of that spectrum. Okay, so we think, oh, this stuff, these walls are this ugly white. Okay, there's gray tiles. My shirt is blue. to me and to you because we've got eyeballs to see it. So Berkeley was kind of onto something. It is our own experience. And we have similar, our minds all work in a similar way, so that's how we know we're having a similar experience, for the most part. But think about someone who's colorblind. They're not having the same experience. Does that mean it is not blue? It is not blue, or whatever it is, to them. So we have a tendency to think that the way things look to us, that's how things are. Coffee is saying, no, that's how our minds have rendered it. Which is why Hugh had a point. Like our stuff about cause and effect that he said earlier, he's right. We can't know about reality ultimately and objectively, but we can say for certain that's how it is to us. That's how it looks, and we can say that with certainty. So we can say scientific truth. Yeah, this stuff is true, and we can say that confidently, at least in terms of how our senses work and how our minds work. We can say this stuff is true. Is it true in some absolute ultimate sense? We can't know that question, so we're not going to bother with it. And that stuff's called metaphysics. Cut it out. So for that reason, Kant says, stuff like theology, like Thomas Aquinas is saying, is theology a science? No. No, that stuff's not science. So stop talking about it as if it were. And he says, here is how our mind works. Okay, let's talk about the process. First thing your mind does to render is transcendental aesthetic. Your mind, first of all, it creates the axes for all this stuff to be interpreted. Your mind creates space and time. Now, when I say your mind creates space and time, what I don't mean by that, behold, time, and now all of a sudden it exists out there for like some sort of creative process. Your mind renders everything in space and time, such that you cannot conceive of something happening outside space and outside time. That's not space-time like Einstein's space, like the space-time he did. It's something completely different. But you can't picture like space over here and space over here and picture nothing in between. What's in between? More space. You can't do it. Everything has to happen in space, and everything has to happen in time. And that's the basic. That's the basic thing in your mind. It's kind of like, again, with like a video game example. It's kind of like that's the engine that's in place for the render. I think of like Unreal Engine. The engine's in place. So it creates the axes. That's the first thing your mind does. Render space and time. Space and time is not out there. It's in your mind. It's something that your mind does to render the reality around us. Really the reality that we're experiencing within us. So that's the first step of rendering. Okay, so I'm going to be clear here. Space and time. Look, and that's why things like space. And we can talk about space being infinite. We can't really talk about what it is. It's this big. No, we can measure the stuff in space. Now, when I say space, I don't mean outer space necessarily. It could be. But like around us, like we can measure things in space, but we can't really measure space itself. Because the universe is infinite, right? Or infinite space. And time's a weird measurement too. Because we can measure the passage of time, but we can't really measure time itself. Okay? Which is why even the measurement of time is a little less intuitive, right? So we can say, this table is this many feet across, it weighs this much. I can feel the weight. But time, that's why even like moments of time, like sometimes we're like, oh, this feels like it's taking a long time. Okay? I've been waiting for that sound to go off for a while. I haven't let my guard down though. Like time is an experience, it's weird, but it's something our mind is actually rendering. Okay? That's step one. Step two, the transcendental analytic. So the next thing your mind does is it renders these subcategories. So we call these the categories. And they all have their subheadings, but there's quantity, quality, relation, modality. So quantity. So you can say this room right now. What's going on is this. Okay, now, fortunately, we don't have to boot up when we wake up. Can you imagine this? Right. Senses activate. Good morning. All right, then your space and time turns on. Okay, rendering things in 4 dimensions. Great. Oh, analytic stuff's popping in. This is where the individual stuff is rendered. So quantity. I'm seeing multiple tables. Quality. They're brownish, like we talked about. Relation. Well, this one's so close. This thing's really close to me. All right, I'm able to render that. Modality. This one's busted. Okay, this chair is missing a little peg on the bottom. There's some stuff like also modes, so like little particularities of things. That's the next step of rendering. Final step of rendering, transcendental unity of the apperception. What's that? That's me. Or you. All of this rendering happens in a contiguous experience. So remember Hume's bundles of perception? Yeah, it's bundling, but it's bundling, all those perceptions are coming together in a single consciousness. That's me. Transcendental, without lag. Like, it's not like stuff happens that I see, and then there's some kind of other thing happening with what I hear. Sometimes we experience that when, like, we hear an echo, and then we're like, it takes us. Or you see lightning, and then you hear thunder a little bit. Why the delay? Well, because of the way sound works. But for the most part, we see things contiguously. Okay, all at once. We're taking it all in at once, and it happens in a single consciousness experience, because that's how our mind works. And so really, even when you're looking around right now at the room, the experience of taking in the room, it's not really, the room is not out there as such. It doesn't look this way. It looks this way in our own minds. Or wherever you are. You're looking at the blue sky. That experience of the blue sky is not happening out in the world. It's happening in your mind. That's what's going on there. I'm going to science it back and stuff on this point. So I need to stop there, but I'm going to be continuing with Kant. We'll stick on Kant for a while, and then his successors next time. Have a good weekend, everybody.